Where are my proud Latinos at tonight? You guys see what I mean? It's wide open. There's so many of them. It's absolutely incredible. Believe it or not, people, I welcome migrants to the United States of America with open arms. And by open arms, I mean like this. It's wild. And these Latinos, they love making babies, too. Just know that. They do. They do. There's no pulling out. They don't do that. They come inside, just like they did to our country. There's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the second episode of Coasting with Krangus.
You look like if Al Bundy had a baby with Al Bundy, but I love it. It's a very... Imagine being canceled in Mississippi.
Everybody is really mad at Tony Hinchcliffe right now. If you don't know who Tony Hinchcliffe is, he's a comedian. He is the host of the #1 live podcast in the world, I believe. It's called Kill Tony. The premise of it is they take anybody can sign up, and they take basically open mic level comics, which if you're not in the comedy world, an open micer is a person that's the starting point of any comedian. And they take people like that, they let them do a minute, and then afterwards they basically roast them. It'll be a panel of him and usually some celebrity guest or other comedians. But ultimately, it's an open mic. That's what it is. Tony Hinchcliffe is the king of the open mic. And as such, if you look at the set if you're a comedian and you watch that set, I promise you've seen worse, if not the same, at an open mic on any given Tuesday or Wednesday. I personally run an open mic here in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, every Tuesday, and I've seen manifestos read on that stage. So it's wild to me that everybody's surprised. It's also wild to me that everybody's surprised. This isn't the first time he said that.
How about one more time for the filthy little fucking chink that was just up here?
Now, if you're the kind of person that didn't even know who Tony Hinchcliffe was, you just saw him at a political rally, which is why I thought it was kind of weird that he treated that like an open mic. Then I get it. Like, you're mad because this is a guy that just said some racist shit. But if you're a comedian, like, you know that you've heard far worse than that at any given open mic. What I do get tired of is people bashing other comedians that are more successful than them. If you took that same energy and focused on, making your own career better, maybe you got to start writing better jokes too. Maybe you got to do what you got to do. Then maybe you could become the next Tony Hinchcliffe, and maybe you could change things from the inside. The outcry from other comedians is wild to me. The only reason that I'm bringing it up right now is because I do think it represents one thing. There was a thing that a lot of the comedy world calls the Exodus. But right around after COVID, Joe Rogan and a bunch of comedians decided, hey, we're going to move to Austin. I thought this was a great segue into this second episode of the podcast because it represents what a lot of people do. Tony Hinchcliffe, Joe Rogan, they all moved to the South because they saw something that they really liked. They saw a very nice people. So it does bother me that people move to the South, people like Tony Hinchcliffe, because they think, oh, I'm going to move somewhere where I can get away with saying that, not realizing no, we don't fuck with that. That's not our culture anymore. We all grew up with the shame of what our grandparents and ancestors did. So we don't need this kind of heat. We don't need other people from LA making us look bad. Like, people always talk shit about the South for being this backwoods racist state. But my problem with that is, before you start judging us in the South, I promise you I have performed all over this country, and I have seen more racists in places like Cogden, Illinois, Eastern California, New Jersey. I've seen way more racist people there than I've seen here. I have an experience when I was in Wyoming a few years ago. I was on tour and I did this show in Gillette, Wyoming. And afterwards I was hanging out. I was talking to people out front, and there was this dude. He was bullshitting with me. He was excited about the show because if you're a comedian and you've ever worked the real road, you've done redneck rooms out in the middle of fucking nowhere, you know that people like small towns often will pay out more because of the fact that you're in a town where there's nothing else to do. You know, it's not like if I were to go to LA right now, I could not sell a ticket to save my life. But if I were to do a show in Prattville, Alabama, I promise you I could sell out that shit. So I was at this show in Gillette, and this guy was talking to me outside, and he was real excited. And this car drives by, uh, black guy driving it, and this white guy looks at me, and he looks at me, kind of gives a grin, and looks at this black guy driving by. Hey, yeah, get out of here! And then he drops the N word real hard. And I was like, yo, like to me, like I grew up here in Mississippi. Like I grew up on the go. I grew up in like part of the epicenter of the civil rights movement. We grew up with a lot of black people. You'll get your ass kicked saying shit like that here. My generation of people from the South didn't grow up segregated. We grew up with a lot of people of different races. And I'm not saying racism in the South and in Mississippi doesn't exist. If you want any proof of that, just look at the reaction that the Mississippi Gulf Coast has to Black Spring Break every year. If you don't know what Black Spring Break is and you think that that's a racist term, let me explain. We'll go right now. The Mississippi Gulf Coast is, I think, the longest man-made beach in the world, and it commemorates. So the Black Spring Break commemorates when it was first built. They didn't allow black people to go on that beach. So Black Spring Break is a commemorative event every year uh, when they did the public wade-ins. Most of you, if you know from the Gulf Coast, know. But every year for Black Spring Break, a lot of the businesses will shut down because they think they'll complain about, oh, black people don't tip, or they won't say black people, they'll just say, oh, they don't tip, or they'll cause problems, or they last year there was a shooting, don't get me wrong, but I put it to you this way, Mississippi Gulf Coast, if you have a problem with that, but you don't have a problem with Mardi Gras or cruising the coast every year where people get run over, then what are we talking about? We have a situation where a lot of people are coming to the city at the same time. And the problem with Black Spring Break is when you close those businesses and now limit the resources of that many people, it doesn't matter what color they are, that many people with limited resources, things are going to get heated. I'm surprised it doesn't get worse with that many businesses closing down, with that many people that are. There is racism that happens here in Mississippi, but I don't like that people will judge us and they'll make Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana the boogeyman for all the racist stuff that happens in the U.S. Meanwhile, there's people that are like Tulsa, Arizona is like the headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan. Like, solve your own fucking racism in your state before you start coming to us. But it also makes it worse when people like Tony Hinchcliffe move down here and they say shit like that because they think they can get away with it, and then they get mad because they didn't get away with it, because people in the South are also like, dude, we are tired of having this level of heat on us. The other side of it is people will come to the South and then they will move here, but then they'll recreate the thing that they escaped from. You know, if you go to 6th Street right now, it looks like a new weird, like different dimension version of Hollywood. Like it's fucking wild. Next part of the podcast is for the comedians that watch, the comedians that come out to my open mic every Tuesday. We do at the Jute Joint have the official longest running open mic in the state of Mississippi, and also Comedy Room, because we've had other comedians on that stage before. National acts. We've had Ty Rivera. We've had Yoshi Obayashi. We've had Mo Alexander. We've had a few Kill Tony people even. We had Celia Contreras. Hell, some of the people that have recently been on Kill Tony, Lino Rodriguez, Duncan Stone Street, Nikki Coleman, they came from out of this environment. So I'm proud of the fact that I've started an open mic that has started a lot of comedy. I started comedy in Phoenix about 11 years ago, right when I got out of the Marine Corps. There I was able to grind and do open mics like 2 to 3 times a night if I wanted to, which I think is really good for comedy, because I do hear comics here talk a lot about like, oh, I've been doing comedy for 7, 8 years, and it's like, well, there's really only been like one. There was a moment where I was running like 3 to 4 open mics a week, but it got really exhausting. I won't do that again. But I can't look at a lot of the local comics and say, okay, like, yeah, you've been doing it for that long. Because if you've only been going up once every couple of weeks, that's really not enough grinding. And I'd like to get to a point where we have multiple open mics a week. That's the next step for the scene here. I just know that I can't do it myself. I've talked about this before. I don't think, as of right now, if I left, the comedy scene here would die. And I don't like that because I don't, that makes it, that puts too much pressure on me, even though it's not a big scene anyway. But the ultimate thing is the foundation of any comedy scene is the open mic. You know, where else are you going to discover new talent? Where else are you going to, if you're a comedian, where else are you going to work out new bits? If you're a comedian, 2 to 3 years into comedy, you really shouldn't be working out your new bits like as a feature. You should really be doing that at the open mic and then taking that. I hear comics in New Orleans do this sometimes, and it's like it's exhausting, which we'll get into a whole other episode about the New Orleans comedy scene because I did live there for a little. I moved here because my dad was dying, and I felt when I first moved back, it wasn't supposed to be like a permanent. I stayed because I started realizing, well, COVID happened, and I stayed after that because I was mostly stuck. But then I started realizing, you know what? Rather than move to like LA, because that was originally my plan was to move to Los Angeles. When I was still living in Phoenix, by the end of my stay there, I was going out to LA pretty regularly on the weekends to hit open mics and just network. So my original plan was to move there, and but once I was here, I realized, and at that time, I was working for the Brewery Comedy Tour. And if you don't know anything about that, it's Heron Entertainment. A lot of people have a lot to say about that. We'll do a whole other episode about my stint with him, my deployment with Ron Heron. But I did I've headlined shows through the Brewery Tour in I think 26 different states in multiple cities in those states. That's really what turned me into the having the ability to headline. Like after I moved back, I'd already had that experience, and I realized, like rather than move to a place where I'm just another guy, or rather than move to a place that has plenty of comedy. You can throw a stone and hit a comedy show, just like you can do it in Austin. Austin's a weird place because it's a lot of like where a lot of cities like Nashville or Phoenix, you can walk around, or New Orleans, you'll walk around and like every bar has like a band playing at any given moment. Austin is like you walk around Sixth Street and any given bar has an open mic going on or a comedy showcase going on, or it is a comedy club. So there's actual headliners going on. It's a really unique place. But rather than move to a place like that where it's already really saturated, the audiences there have enough comedy. Like they get enough of it. I would rather stay here where I grew up, where I made a home for myself, and give people that wouldn't otherwise have a comedy scene comedy. That's what I feel because the audience that I built at the Juke Joint, and if you're watching this, you're probably that audience. I I get a lot more gratification making those people laugh because of the fact that I feel like they come out to feel something. Whether it's because some people come out because they really are broken and they really want to feel something, and I do appreciate you coming out and choosing my night to give you that because that's the kind of people that I really feel I would much rather perform for that than people. I learned like on the winery comedy tour, people that were pretty wealthy at these comedy shows, or it was in some cases people that were pretending to be wealthy. I saw you drive in with that Honda Accord, but I felt like I just never connected with that audience because these are people that are just, they're coming out to a comedy show to say that they went to a comedy show. It really wasn't about the fact that they wanted to feel anything. I do feel like at the Jute Joint, we have established like a comedy scene where people really do want to feel something and actually experience comedy and actually laugh at things. And I know that because of the things that they laugh at. Like, man, you can get the Jute Joint, some of the stuff that you can get away with saying, and I don't mean racist shit, but I mean like talking about death, talking about war, suicide, like actual pain. The things that you probably wouldn't get away with because it would be too uncomfortable at a comedy club, you can get away with saying at the Juke joint. And that's as long as they'll have me, I will do that show. I will run that show for as long as they have me. And that's the show. I also will tell a lot of people that's the show that I bomb at more than anything else, because the regular audience that comes has seen my set about a million times. But I won't stop doing it because I feel like it does make my steel stronger every time I do it. And also, if you're from the Mississippi Gulf Coast, you know where we're from. You know what this place is. We're a city of everybody either having PTSD from Hurricane Katrina or you're at least the child of somebody that has PTSD from Hurricane Katrina because we all lived through it and nobody gave a shit about us. New Orleans got all of the headlines for that.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
But hey, we all lived through it, and what I loved about it, like looking back, is all the memories that we have. Like as awful as Hurricane Katrina was, and as awful as I'll give you my experience right now. Like our family was in Moss Point, Mississippi, and it was me, my younger siblings. I'm the oldest by 8 years, and there was a moment in this house in Moss Point where the floodwater came up to about mid thigh for me, which means we had to start picking up my little siblings because they were little. The flood's like coming in through the power outlets, and there was a moment where the whole family was holding hands, praying for God not to kill us in that moment. The aftermath was a little bit different. Now we have this situation where, there's looters, there is I had staph infection on my legs because hospitals aren't even available because some of them were flooded themselves. So people are getting infected because we've been in that flood water, which is nasty. There's sewage in it. There's no AC, so you're just like there's no running water, so you're not taking a shower. So we all got pretty gross, and you know that's an experience that a lot of us had. But I do remember after that initial shock of the storm, I remember like the way that the community came together while New Orleans was getting all these headlines.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
While that was happening in New Orleans, the other thing that was happening in the Mississippi Gulf Coast, we really all came together. I mean, I didn't have the fortune to stay here. I went to move to my mom's house in Alabama. But I remember because I would come back on the weekends. I stayed here for a month and then I went to finish my senior year in Alabama with my mom. But I would come back on the weekends, and the way that like everybody in school, there was no longer any cliques, there was no longer popularity. That didn't exist anymore. It was just all one community that loved each other, and it was a beautiful moment. I think a lot of people here on the coast compared it to on a national level the way that New York was, and I think the whole country was after 9/11. That's the kind of place that I have here, and that's why I'm a little bit. I don't really want to move. Like every once in a while, I get to these moments where I'm like, man, I could probably make it. I could probably make a little bit more money if I moved to a different city, but I don't like emotionally and just I don't want to really move to a place, move away from a place that I feel like needs this comedy, this style of comedy. Because also, I feel like a lot of people that move away from their hometown when they get too big in comedy, they move away to like New York or Austin, and then they just become that scene. I don't want to do that. I don't want to there's something about people from the South and the comedic voice that we have. And I'm seeing it. I see it all the time. I see people start, I've seen people grow, and we have a unique voice. And I don't want to take that away. I want to culture that. I want to nurture that. I want to give the world that. And if I can do that on this podcast, which I will have some of these people on this podcast over the next few years. As long as I run this podcast, I'm going to introduce some of this talent on the podcast so you can see. I think that we're a people that we're very good at storytelling. I think a lot of people that grew up here have that uncle or grandpa that was really good at telling stories. And so that kind of gets reciprocated to our comedic voice. We're especially in a world right now where comedically, if you look at TikTok or if you look at Facebook Reels or YouTube Shorts, the big thing right now is crowd work. And that's not really what we're known for. We're more of a storytelling type, comedic voice. And That's what I want to stick around and nurture, and that's what I want to be a part of because, and that's what I want to say for everybody that's mad, all the comics anyway that are mad about Kill Tony. Do your own thing, focus on your thing and see if you can, come up with a better show. Kill Tony's the number one live podcast right now. What if you're able to make your own show about storytelling or about actual setup punch if you're a comedian, but if you're able to do anything, any of that, what's wrong with actually putting your foot forward and saying, I can be better? I've always said this, rather than bash another comic, be the better comic. I try not, don't stop comparing yourself to another comic, especially one that's more successful than you, because ultimately it's never going to make you look good. It just makes you look like a whiny bitch when you complain about other comedians that are more successful than you. Because I'm telling you right now, just like Tony Hinchcliffe will probably never see this podcast, he doesn't give a shit about you anyway. You know, what he has built is he's an idiot collector, really. I mean, he's built an audience of comedians that will bow down to him, and they're diehard people. I've seen Kill Tony fans have come to my shows before because I've booked people like Celia Contreras, and man, Kill Tony fans are going to be diehard until Tony Hinchcliffe comes out and just full on murders a guy. Like, I don't think, even then, I think people are still going to support Tony to the end. And, to me, it just doesn't affect me because he's never going to book me. And we're probably never going to cross paths. And if we do, I mean, maybe he probably won't even have ever seen this episode anyway. But I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about building what Krangus can build. And I'm worried about what I can bring out of the Mississippi Gulf Coast comedy scene and give to the world. Because I think that's far more important. I think giving our comedic voice to our own community and then hopefully maybe the region and then eventually the nation sees that. That is far more important to me than worrying about what another comedian is doing or comparing myself to another comedian or their success. So fuck all that. Stay tuned. This is probably a good chance to subscribe. This podcast is very small right now. I get that. I know. But it's only going to grow with the support that you guys give me. So, and again, this podcast. Yeah, it's called Coasting with Krangus because that's my voice. But you know, uh, I'm going to have some local guests on. We're going to get these people on. So stay tuned.